to your point about playoffs, it's easy to get tight. It's easy to say, well, we'll punt and play defense. No, man. If you were going to go for 4th and 1 on the minus 45-yard line in week 6 at 1 o'clock, you've got to go for it in a wild card matchup on the road. You've got to be true to what you've been. And
welcome to the NFL on Fox podcast, presented by Verizon, the NFL powered by Verizon 5G. I am your host, Dave Helman, and we made it. Wild Card Weekend is here. We played 272 regular season games to get to this moment. 14 teams remain. 12 of them are playing this weekend. A full slate of 6 wild card games for the right to move on to the divisional round of the playoffs. What's better than this? And I gotta be honest, I push back against the league's ever expanding philosophy, but wild card football on a Monday night, it's fun. You get used to playing Monday night football. By the time Monday rolls around, you're ready for some high stakes entertainment on a Monday night, and we got it. Sunday afternoon all the way to Monday night. Fantastic games. So excited to watch. I'm so excited to dive into all of these matchups with y'all. And I'm getting a huge assist this week from 2 guys that have joined us a lot on the show this year to cover the AFC, the first 3 games of the weekend. Chargers play the Texans, Steelers rematch with the Ravens, and the Bills play the Broncos on Sunday morning. To talk about all of those games, we're going to be joined later on from our guy, Peter Schrager. Cover everything on that side of the conference. Fantastic conversation with Peter coming up. But to lead the show, who better to talk to than our guy, Greg Olsen of the NFL on Fox? He's called so many games this season. He's called so many NFC teams this season. He's intimately familiar with all 6 of the teams playing on the NFC side of the league. Joined by Greg to talk about Packers-Eagles on Sunday afternoon, the Sunday night game, Commanders-Buccaneers, and of course, that Monday night game we referenced, Vikings, Rams. Greg joined us to talk about all of that, as well as plenty of other stuff. We got into the coaching landscape, what might happen there, trends around the league. Really fun conversation with Greg to start out the show. All right, Greg, let's talk a little NFC, man. And I can't think of somebody better to talk about these wild card matchups with than you, because you're very familiar with all of these teams. I mean, I know some of them were a while ago, but I went back and looked. I mean, you got Green Bay once, you got Tampa twice, and then Philly, Washington, and Minnesota. You saw all these teams 3 times over the course of the season. So I'm curious to pick your brain about the way these teams have sort of progressed over the course of the year. And let's just go through this chronologically. First one is Packers at Eagles. Met in week 1. And that's actually, okay, I take it back. That's the first thing I want to ask you is 2 of these 3 matchups are week 1 rematches. Philly, Green Bay, Washington, and Tampa Bay are games that happened in week 1. How useful is that, if it is at all? Because I'm sitting here thinking that tape is next to worthless at this point.
yeah, there's not a whole lot you're going to take from those games. It was so long ago. You were a different team. Again, for Washington and Tampa Bay and so many of these teams, like, it's your first year, it's your first time as a staff. It's your first new, Liam Cohen's calling plays for the first time. Dan Quinn's entire staff. Sirianni's got roster turnover with coordinators, with coaching turnover with coordinators. So you just look there's no team in the NFL that is remotely close to what they were in week 1 to where they are now going into the wild card round. So yeah, I'm with you there. There's not a whole lot that you're going to pull from. Most teams are going to get their scouting from the last 4 or 5 games of the season. That's going to be the sample size of trends, obviously personnel, game flow, style of play, philosophy. You're going to learn more about the teams over the last 3, 4, maybe 5 weeks of the season. More than anything you're going to get from the first half, let alone the opening week of the year.
Speaking of which, and I know, it's been equally ancient history since you called a Packer game. I think that happened when Malik Willis was the quarterback. But it's very interesting sort of transformation for the Green Bay Packers as they head into the playoffs, because it feels like Green Bay has leaned into being a ground and pound Josh Jacobs led team. Jordan Love, he's had a nice season, especially for a guy that missed that time due to injury. But you watch the Packers heading into this matchup, and I'm not sure there's that big of a difference between them and the Eagles between what they want to do. Like, I think people just have this vision of Green Bay as wanting to chuck it all over the yard, but I'm not sure that's what I expect to see from them in the playoffs.
Yeah, and I think that's been, really the root of it all year. I think Matt LaFleur has done an unbelievable job. Whether, obviously in the games that Jordan Love missed with Malik Willis, we called one of those games. They ran the ball 40 something times for two. Well, I don't remember off the top of my head, but it was north of 200. But like, it's a very fun, diverse, kind of interesting run game. There's jet motions and guys going in orbits and misdirection and a million different forms of counter and counter tandem. Like, it's a really fun run game in the sense that he's super creative as a run game designer. So they've leaned into that. Josh Jacobs has been a great pickup. I think a lot of people had some questions in the offseason. You let Aaron Jones go and you sign Josh Jacobs, way different contracts. What are you going to get? And obviously he's been incredible and obviously has carried a lot of the weight. They're still very talented at the wide receiver position, so they can hit you on the big ones. Christian Watson getting hurt is obviously a huge story. He's their downfield big play guy, suffered that knee injury, which is unfortunate. But I think Jordan Love has showed last year he kind of carried them to the playoffs. It was really on his back. He really was the breakout star of that unit last year on their playoff run. We were there for a bunch of those games in person calling them. But this year, it's definitely a different identity. But I think the key point you have to recognize, anytime you talk about a team that's willing and able to run the ball more and more effectively, you have to look on the other side of the ball. Defensively, they've played really well. And you can only run the ball in direct proportion to how good you play defense. So in a matchup like this against Philadelphia, one of the most explosive run and pass teams in the league, if not the number one, if Jalen Hurts is healthy and that offense is operating with Saquon and the deep passing game with Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown and one of the best O-lines in football, if they're rolling how they're rolling and they're scoring points on you, you can't hand the ball to Josh Jacobs a million times. You can't slow the game down and play the possession game. You're just not going to have enough possessions to score enough points. It's just the way it goes. So everything is contingent upon how well does Green Bay's defense slow down Philadelphia's offense. The more punts, the more takeaways, the more field goal tries you make Philadelphia attempt, the more patient and willing Matt LaFleur can be letting that run game dominate the game. All of a sudden, you fall down 2 scores. All of a sudden, this turns into a 30-point race. You're not going to hand the ball off 35 times and think you're going to score 30 points. It's just not going to happen. So it's a very interesting conversation, but I think people need to make sure they spend enough time saying, yeah, your ability to run is important, but it's only as important as your ability to play defense.
Well, let's talk about that because, okay, as we're recording this, Jalen Hurts he's scheduled to practice Wednesday. I'm not overly concerned about him missing this game, but you were there when he got hurt against Washington, led to a wild one, one of the most fun games of the last month or so. That was 3-4 weeks ago at this point when you factor in the Eagles resting their starters in the season finale. And this was already a team that dealt with some, I don't want to call it shaky because obviously they're so explosive. They've been so good, but we know about the Eagles' problems scoring in the fourth quarter. It can take them some time to get going. I guess if you want to call it rust, we can call it that. But do you worry about them sort of hitting the ground running with Jalen Hurts being absent for as long as he was?
Yeah, I always worry when my starting quarterback is out, right? I think every team does. I think we see week in, week out, time in, time out. There is a difference between the starting quarterback and the backup quarterback. And that's not a knock on these guys. They're good players. It's just different. The offense operates different. The play callers operate different. There's more confidence. It's just everything across the board is different. So, yeah, I mean, he gets hurt in that week 16 game in Washington. We called that game. Again, hops up, tries to stay in, walking around the sideline. You say, okay, you just never know with concussions how it all plays out. So he doesn't play in week 17 against Dallas. And then week 18, they sit everyone. So don't assume he wasn't going to play anyway, but who knows? And hasn't been back on the practice field since. So today is a huge day. Getting a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 3 full practices will go a long way towards just reacclimating him. But Yeah, I don't want my quarterback to ever miss any time. I don't want my quarterback to ever get hurt. I think every team in the league obviously is contingent upon their quarterback being available. So not ideal. If he can get back though today and get a full Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I think that will go a long way towards kind of everyone taking a deep breath and saying, "Hey, we have our entire offense at our disposal. Let's go out there and be aggressive in the pass game early, get a lead, then let Saquon and this offensive line and the run game kind of close the game out." That's the model that's been there for Philadelphia over the years, and obviously a healthy Jalen Hurts goes a long way in that.
I love how much variance there is in this game because, I mean, they played a 34-29 shootout in Brazil. Everybody was slipping everywhere on that field, but still a really back and forth game. I wouldn't be surprised if we see that, but I also think there's potential for like a war of attrition here with these two running games. Like if this game was like 20-17, I don't think anybody should be surprised. I appreciate the way these teams can sort of do whatever they need to do. I'm interested to see how that kind of unfolds.
Yeah, and I think that's the beauty of being a balanced offense going into the playoffs is again, we don't have best of five series, we don't have best of seven series. So the teams that typically can survive are teams that can you win when you don't have your best game? Can you win based on weather elements that maybe you're so dependent on the passing game and the game just doesn't dictate that that's possible, or vice versa. You're so run heavy, but you can't win a shootout because your defense has a bad day and they've been great all year. Like the teams in the playoffs that have more variability in the manner in which they can win. You can win load scoring because you got defense. You can win shootouts because you have explosive offenses. You can win close games. The teams that can kind of check all of those boxes throughout the years just gives you more opportunities and more pathways to winning one and done week after week after week through the playoffs. So I think with both these teams, the defenses have been really good. Obviously, the turnaround with Vic Fangio and Philadelphia from the struggles last year, they've flipped it. And, I don't know where it all shook out at the end, but they're a top two or three defense in most of the important categories. And, obviously Vic Fangio is one of the best to do it. So obviously, and then I think Hafley's done a nice job taking over as the D coordinator there in Green Bay. So I'm with you. I'd be shocked if this was a runaway mid-30s game. I think that would surprise me. I'd be more surprised if this is a 35-34 game than if it was a 20-17. Like to me, this is a low to mid-20s. Every turnover, either way, all of a sudden for one team, that number gets closer to 30, and for the other team, it gets closer to 20, right? So I always say no turnovers, clean possession by possession game. How would I look at it? To me, this is a low to mid 20s game for each team, and then obviously variables to go up or down from there.
Sunday night game is the Commanders at the Buccaneers, and I think a lot of people, and understandably so, I get it. Jayden Daniels is making his playoff debut. It's a lot of eyeballs, a lot of expectations on him in his first playoff game. We can talk about that, but I'm curious on your perspective for this. Okay, Dan Quinn and Todd Bowles have both coached a lot of playoff football. I'm not really worried about that. Cliff Kingsbury, one playoff game as a play caller. Liam Cohen, obviously making his playoff debut as a play caller in this game. We talk a lot about players, but how do you think coaches handle playoff football and how they might have to adapt to that, meeting the moment, the next level? You hear how much teams scout their opponents in the playoffs. How do you see that? Am I making too big of a deal of that, or is that like a sneaky storyline here with guys getting used to that stage?
No, I think there's definitely a lot of relevance to that. I think that's real. I think when you look at the job that Kingsbury and Liam Cohen have done for their respective offenses, there's a reason that those two names are going to get kicked around to get head coaching opportunities, at least interviews. And a guy like Liam Cohen that maybe wasn't a household name in the sense that Kingsbury was, obviously a head coach, a little more well known from his college days. Liam Cohen kind of bounced back and forth between the floor staff and McVay's staff in LA and Kentucky, and then back to LA, and kind of bounced back and forth there. Had a couple stints in each spot before he lands taking over for Canales down with Todd Bowles. So maybe a little less known of a guy, but I think when you ask people around the industry, you ask people around like what a job Liam Cohen has done down there. I mean, he's been fantastic. I mean, it's been a home run hire for Todd Bowles bringing in Liam Cohen to replace when Dave Canales became the head coach in Carolina. So Todd Bowles knocked that out of the park, and I would say Dan Quinn did too, right? I mean, it's everyone focuses so much on plays and X's and O's, but it's about bringing out the best in your quarterback. And you look at what Kingsbury did, and he obviously had a lot of experience at the college level, that style of game, and he also had the ability to coach a young quarterback in Kyler Murray and bring him into the league and kind of do some things right, do some things wrong in his time in Arizona. And now he brings in a guy like Jayden Daniels, and you say, okay, what past lessons did I learn from my time with Kyler? How do I build this offense around the skill sets that are unique to Jayden Daniels versus maybe some other quarterbacks, and bring some of the college, some of the NFL, and blend that together where it's not so much a Cliff Kingsbury offense as much as it is a Jayden Daniels offense operated by Cliff Kingsbury. And you see kind of elements of all of their backgrounds blended into one. So I think the offenses in that matchup are the stories. I think that Baker Mayfield season's been remarkable. Jayden Daniels has been remarkable. There's weapons all over. Terry McLaurin, Mike Evans. I think Todd Bowles is obviously a defensive guy. I think that Tampa defense is kind of beat up. They haven't been as dominant as we've seen in past years under Todd Bowles.
I wanted to mention that to you. I'm glad you brought it up. I mean, 180 yards at halftime to the Spencer Rattler Saints the other day. I mean, and injury is a big part of it. I get it, but I worry about this Tampa defense. I think people associate Todd Bowles with great defense, and he is a great defensive coach, but I don't know if the horsepower is there. Like, this feels like a first to 28 or 30 points win sort of situation.
Which I think for us viewers would be fantastic. Now, Dan Quinn and Todd Bowles, who are proud defensive minds, they're going to say, no, we're going to, they're going to have great plans. And obviously those guys have had a lot of success, coordinating and orchestrating really good defenses over the years. But I think with the way Baker's playing and the way that Jayden Daniels is playing, I think this could be a little bit more like in my mind, this has the power to be like a higher scoring battle than the other matchup with Green Bay and Philadelphia, which means this game's going to be 7-6 and Philly Green Bay is going to be 45-40. But like, that's my first gut instinct, without like really diving in. That's kind of my first gut instinct. I think if both quarterbacks get off to a fast start, they've got weapons, they have play callers that have been good. They've got to stay true to what they've been all year. To your point about playoffs, it's easy to get tight. It's easy to say, well, we'll punt and play defense. No, man. If you were going to go for 4th and 1 on the minus 45-yard line in week 6 at 1 o'clock, you've got to go for it in a wild card matchup on the road. You've got to be true to what you've been. And I think Dan Quinn has really showed that he's willing to kind of play the odds and give his team chances. So he's going to have to do that on the road to give themselves an opportunity to keep pace. But I'm fascinated for both of the NFC games. All 3 of the NFC games.
It's a funny juxtaposition of Tampa and Washington have these explosive offenses with these, young play callers, but it's going to be 2 very veteran, 2 very defensive minded head coaches who have the final say of what ultimately happens. And yeah, that is a fascinating wrinkle of who's going to meet that moment the best. Because especially in the case of Todd Bowles, I mean, we've seen a few games this year where he opted for the conservative road on a big national TV spot. So I'm not going to be surprised if we're talking about something like that again on Monday morning. 2 coaches that I don't think are going to struggle with that are Sean McVay and Kevin O'Connell, the Monday night game. The big thing I want to ask you here, Vikings at Rams Monday night ESPN game. We just saw Aaron Glenn blitz the bejesus out of Sam Darnold, and it worked like a charm, and they flustered him, and the Vikings couldn't score in the red zone. But if you go back and watch, there were so many throws there. I mean, there were plays to be made for the Vikings, and that's why you blitz, right? Is it a good idea to try that again if you're the LA Rams? Like, do you trust that you can do that to Sam Darnold again, or do you kind of have to think of something a little more nuanced and expect that he's going to be ready for that?
Yeah, so I didn't have the Rams at all this year. So I've just watched them from afar. Obviously know a lot of the young pieces on defense that have gotten better. Of course, the familiar names on the offensive side of the ball with Stafford and those guys. But I think the biggest thing you have to be careful about in the playoffs is you see the team you're about to play maybe struggle with an element of what their previous opponent did to them. In this case, the defense, the blitz, the style of play of Aaron Glenn and the Lions and the troubles that they gave Minnesota's offense and Sam Darnold the other night in the last game of the year. I think what you have to be careful is if any of those elements align with what you're already good at, great. Lean into it. Your players have a lot of reps at it. You've done it all year. It's not going to fry anybody's brain here going into the playoffs. What you have to be careful of, there's a fine line between having a game plan to really attack your opponent and also having a game plan that is installing all this new stuff that you don't have a lot of reps on. You haven't really implemented these coverages or these blitzes or these fronts or whatever it is all year round. It's like, hey, but in 3 days, we're going to really fine tune this. And it's like, I don't know. So like if there's elements that the Rams can pull from what the Lions did the other night where they had a lot of success and it overlaps and it's stuff that when they come in Wednesday morning and they install their first and second down game plan on defense, whether it's their pressure plan or how they tie in their fronts and coverages, if there's some overlap there, absolutely lean in. The rule in the NFL is until you prove it to me that you fixed it, I'm going to test what gave you trouble. That's like a steadfast rule. As long as you're not completely reinventing yourself. If you haven't run zone pressure fire dogs all year, that's not really been what you've been. I don't know if in 3 days before the biggest game of the season, you want to just start putting in a whole bunch of new pressures. If you haven't run certain coverage combinations with the fronts all year round, but you saw the Lions do it, I'm not sure if in 3 days you want to just start, again, reinventing your defense. So there's a fine line. Test what the issues Minnesota had and see if they fixed it. Absolutely. But also remember what got you here. Be true to what you're already good at. What do you have reps at? What do your players really understand? Put in a couple wrinkles here and there that they can handle. Just you can't overdo it.
I cannot wait to see how they handle that. And then on the flip side, we know Brian Flores is going to blitz. That's what the Vikings do. But I can't say I would recommend it against Matthew Stafford. I'm not sure that is a fantastic idea. I looked it up. He's 66% for 1,200 yards, 8 touchdowns, 2 picks when he's blitzed this year. I feel like Matthew Stafford's going to be ready for that. How Brian Flores stays true to what the Vikings are without just opening up free throws for Matthew Stafford, I think that's going to be so much fun to watch.
Yeah, and I remember when we had Minnesota earlier in the year, we called that really good game against Detroit early on in the year. That came right down. It was an unbelievable game. And then we called Minnesota. Oh, God, off the top of my head, I can't remember.
You had Minnesota, Arizona, and you had Minnesota, Atlanta as well.
Yeah, so in both those games. So something that we found interesting is anytime you bring up Brian Flores' name, it's kind of like the boogeyman. It's like, oh my God, they blitz so much. We got to spend all week long preparing for first and second down blitzes and run pressures and third and pass pit blitzes and all. And then there was a time this year where like he wasn't actually blitzing that much. Like it was a lot of like all up pressure and drop into big 7-8 man zones. So like there's this idea, yes, they blitz as much as everyone, but there's periods of time, there's periods of a game, there's stretches week to week where the threat of blitz and what the fear and what it does to your game plan, there's plays that coaches want to run that they scratch out of the game plan and they don't even want to call just in preparation for if we get this blitz, we can't block it, it's out of the game plan. So the fear in which he places, and again, McVay's been doing this for a long time. He knows his way around it and protection wise, and obviously Stafford does a great job moving protections and controlling the game at the line of scrimmage. But the fear of blitz is almost as impactful for Flores in this Vikings defense than even when they do actually blitz. And I think that's an important piece of the style of play that he's created in Minnesota that's led them to take the ball away at whatever 40 some odd takeaways. Just their ability to be so aggressive just puts so much pressure on the offense.
One last thing I wanted to chat with you about, we were talking about it before we started recording, and it's a perfect segue because these NFC matchups are loaded with guys that are going to be considered for head coaching jobs. I mean, we talked about Liam Cohen and Cliff Kingsbury. Kellen Moore on Philadelphia's side of the ball is going to be a guy he's already a guy that's been linked to several interviews. And we were talking about when you look around the league landscape, I mean, Gerard Mayo got a year in New England. Antonio Pierce got a year in Las Vegas. Lou Anarumo just got fired in Cincinnati. It seems like the league is sticking to this trend of wanting offensive-minded, offensive play-calling head coaches. this feels like a ripe situation for any of these guys to stand out when these interviews start happening.
Yeah, I think there's kind of an interesting trend that we're starting to see around the league. And it seems like the rule of thumb is if you have bad defense, somebody's getting fired, right? Like if you're an offensive coach and you okay, so I'll say it like this. If you're Zach Taylor and you can't play, your defense struggled and your offense was great and your quarterback was great and you scored a lot of points and you don't make the playoffs, you fire your defensive coordinator. Kyle Shanahan, you fire your defensive coordinator.
That's another one, San Francisco, yeah.
Sorensen after 1 year in San Francisco, right? So the offensive guys say, okay, as long as my offense is handling business, any struggles that I have on defense, I could always just fire the defensive coordinator, but the head coach never comes under question, right? Like the head coach, hey, your job's offense. Offense is getting the job done. Let's get it done. But when the head coach is a defensive coach, Robert Saleh, the offense is struggling through 5 games. The defense is a top 5 defense in football. Robert Saleh loses his job. So like there's this interesting dynamic where you see teams that gravitate towards offensive coaches. And in the old days, if you were an offensive coach, you said, give all of the energy and resources to the defense. I will take care of the offense because that's why you hired me. I'll make our offense good enough to spend all the draft picks. You look at Kyle Shanahan, all the draft picks, all the money early on was to build the defense. And then they trade for Trent Williams. They draft Kittle. They get Debo. They piece it together. They make the final trade for McCaffrey. And then the offense is what it was. But they had all the foundational pieces on defense. You're seeing teams now say, I'm doing the opposite. If I'm an offensive coach, I am going to be unbelievable on offense. Because if my defense is good, I'm not going to lose my job. I'm just going to replace somebody on the defensive staff or the coordinator. But if I'm a defensive coach, even if my defense is good, if my offense isn't good, we're all getting fired. The whole staff's getting fired. It's a very interesting sense where the offensive guys get more of a leash than the defensive guys. And I think people just understand the value in today's NFL is you have to score points. And it's harder to find offensive minds than it is defense. Defensive guys become available. I mean, look, last year, Sirianni has defensive problems, and in one offseason, he replaces Sean Desai with Vic Fangio.
True.
Right? These guys are available, and they're great coaches.
Well, to be fair to him, like Lou Anarumo was a key to Cincinnati's success for several years.
He was getting head coaching interviews 10 months ago. And now all of a sudden he gets fired. He'll be a head coach. Robert Saleh will eventually be back, either a head coach or he'll be a defensive coordinator, for him. So like, it's just a very interesting case study of the way we see owners valuing the game, the way we see teams valuing the game. It is an offensive driven league. Defensive coaches have proven that obviously they can win. They can do it for a long time. Obviously Belichick and Tomlin, and it can be done different ways. But if you're going to have a non-offensive play calling or a non-offensive minded head coach, the odds of continuing to sign offensive coordinator after offensive coordinator after offensive coordinator back to back to back is hard. Some teams get it right. Todd Bowles has gone 2 for 2. He got 1 year of Canales, playoffs. 1 year of Liam Cohen, playoffs. But then you see Dennis Allen.
That's a really good point.
He replaces the coordinator. He brings in Kubiak for 1 year. They all lose their job.
So it's such an interesting thought. And I mean, is it to your point, is it too simplistic to say like, yeah, I mean, new defensive coordinator hands out a new playbook and guys can pick it up over the course of the offseason. Whereas when you are changing the guy in your quarterback's ear, I mean, all of our experience leads you to believe that is a much harder thing to sustain. And it's such a good point that the Bucs have done it. But for the most part, everybody's trying to avoid having that changeover with your quarterback. And the quickest way to avoid that is to make sure your head coach is the guy that oversees all that, right?
Yeah, traditionally, if you're going to win in the league, you have a really good quarterback, right? And even if your offensive coordinator is not your offensive play caller, say, is not your head coach, and it's just you have a really good offense because you have a really good quarterback and you have a good offense and you're rolling. You're going to lose your offensive coordinator. He's going to go be a head coach. But the reason that Sean McVay can weather losing all of these guys from underneath his tree that have gone on to either be play callers or head coaches. And that offense really kind of just stays the same is because they don't ever have to lose Sean McVay. But if Sean McVay is a defensive coach and he loses Kevin O'Connell and this guy, how many offensive play callers, how many offensive staff members are you going to lose in a row and just think we're never going to lose beat? We're just going to keep going. That's the challenge, what these guys are thinking. I mean, look at what happened to Harbaugh in the Ravens. He lost Mike McDonald, who became the head coach of Seattle. He then had to promote Zach Orr from a position coach to be his coordinator, Anthony Weaver from a position coach to the D coordinator of the Dolphins. So he had to replace him. Denard Wilson had to go from a position coach to being the defensive coordinator of the Titans. He loses all of those position coaches to either head coach or coordinators. They have some early struggles. They kind of are figuring out their way. The defense flips a switch. But why did they have time to find their way on defense? Because Lamar Jackson scoring 30 points a game. So it was just an easier transition period that all of a sudden now they find their way and become the defense that we've seen the last half of the season. And they're one of the favorites to win the Super Bowl. But if all of a sudden Lamar Jackson scoring 17 a game and your defense is really struggling, by the time you turn it around, the season's over. That's the question all these guys are saying is can I be good? Yes. Can I be good for a really long period of time? Because if I'm good, I'm going to lose players and I'm going to lose coaches. Can I continue to weather the storm with my coordinators? And if I can't, how easy is it to replace them? That's the $1 million question everyone's trying to juggle. And it's a very interesting case study as we see it play out throughout the league.
I'm looking at the standings as you're talking, just thinking about each. I mean, there are success stories if you look for them. Obviously, like Mike Tomlin,
yeah,
Sean
totally.
McDermott is another one. But by and large, you look across the league and the most of the established, outside of the Ravens, Steelers, and Bills, most of the established success stories are that situation where you have the offensive continuity. It's very interesting, and like I said, there's no one way to do it, but I think you're totally right that maybe the easiest way to do it is to look for that side of the ball because it all centers around the offense, and it's going to be interesting, especially with so many defensive minded hirings going south in this cycle. It's going to be interesting to see if teams course correct.
Yeah, again, there's no steadfast rule to any of this. Sean McDermott can flat out coach. Dan Campbell doesn't call plays. Sirianni's an offensive guy, but he doesn't call plays. We can go round and round the league of playoff teams. There's no steadfast rule. Dan Quinn, it's not obviously an offense. It's not a steadfast rule that in order to be good, your head coach has to be an offensive guru play caller. I'm not suggesting that. All I'm saying is to be good for a long period of time, to weather roster transition and coaching turnover, to weather that in multiple cycles time after time, it's just a lot more challenging. Now, McDermott's on his third offensive coordinator, right? He had Daboll, then he gets a head job, he gets Dorsey, replaces Dorsey with Joe Brady. But what's been the one constant factor there? Josh Allen.
Yeah, it's nice.
He's got
it's
one of the best two players.
Nice ace to have up your sleeve.
So again, Sean McDermott's a fantastic football coach. Having Josh Allen helps weather the ups and the downs as the rest of the team kind of goes up and down. You always have him. You don't get to bring Josh Allen everywhere. It's just, there's so many unique factors. You don't always have an all-pro quarterback. You don't always have the number one defense in the league. Those things are going to change. Some teams never have them. How do you win for a long period of time if you don't? That's what everyone's trying to solve. That's what Kevin O'Connell's the perfect example. He's won with 5 different quarterbacks.
Absolutely. 5 different quarterbacks. Absolutely. He changed out his defensive coordinator, Brian Flores, upgraded things on that side of the ball. And that's, we've seen Sean McVay weather this. We've seen Andy Reid weather this. Kyle Shanahan as well. I'm going to be fascinated to see. We already know Nick Sirianni didn't handle this so well after 2022. He might have to do it again after this season. Obviously, Dan Campbell could lose both of his coordinators in one offseason, depending on how this all goes. So not trying to get ahead of ourselves, but what comes after these playoff games is going to be really
It's a fun exercise. Listen, the NFL, is a fascinating world. There's a lot of moving parts, trends come and go. How people hired and went through the process years ago is different than how they do it now. How they do it now is going to be different than how they do it in 5 years. There's no perfect solution. It's more art than science. Um, but we can see a common trend of the teams that are able to do it for long periods of time under different circumstances and try to kind of extrapolate out what do those teams all have in common.
Something fun to keep an eye on while all these games are going on. And Greg, I hope you enjoy them, man. It's going to be a lot of fun. I appreciate you taking the time. We'll talk to you soon, dude.
All right. Appreciate it. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks again to Greg for hopping on. And now our AFC portion of the show is our On the Road presented by Honda. Dreams are unstoppable. My guy Peter Schrager is unstoppable week after week throughout this 2024 season. Peter has hopped on with me to talk all things NFL, all of the biggest matchups, all of the biggest storylines heading into every single weekend. So who better to help me preview the first three matchups of Wild Card Weekend than Peter? That's what we did. Texans, Chargers, Ravens, Steelers, Bills, Broncos. Peter and I worked through all of it, all the storylines, all the matchups you need to know. Check it out. All right, Peter, let's dive into these AFC playoff matchups. And I'm just going through these chronologically. So let's start with I'm going to call it the Houston Texans inaugural Saturday afternoon kickoff. I hope, no disrespect to the Houston Texans, but no matter how good they get, no matter how dynastic they ever become, I hope they always start the playoffs on Saturday afternoon. It's just a great tradition.
It's perfect. It's how we start off Wild Card Weekend when the Houston Texans have a home playoff game, and they've done it now 8 times. And every time they have been in that 4:30 window on a Saturday. And I went through the history books. We've seen TJ Yates start for them in that game. We've seen Brock Osweiler. We've seen Matt Schaub. We've seen Mike Mayock call these games. We've seen Tom Hammond call these games. We've seen Noah Eagle, and now we get Ian Eagle. So it really is a test of time. And if you have a Matt McGloin memory or an Andy Dalton memory from one of those games in the early mid to 2000s, you are really a football fan. It is a tradition like no other.
You just took me down memory lane. And yeah, like some of those games were definitely just like, I'm turning this on because I care about football, but I fully expect to be doing something else like 60 minutes into the game.
Yeah,
background. I don't think that'll be the case here. And that was my main talking point here, is just that I know that they've been rough over the second half of the season. I know the Houston Texans are 5-6 since like Halloween. I know the Chargers finished the regular season on a 3-0 tear. I am uncomfortable with the degree to which people are just assuming this is a Chargers win. And I like the Chargers. I think they're a good team. I'm still uncomfortable with the way that a 4-5 game is talked about as a foregone conclusion.
You know, this Texans team beat the Bills this season. They really did. But in recent memory, I saw them lose to the Jets on a Thursday night. I saw them lose to the Titans in a game, and I saw them lose 31-2 on Christmas Day with all of America watching on Netflix to the Ravens. It's hard for me to get around this Texans team. Meanwhile, the Chargers look awesome. So if you're just saying who's coming in playing better football, the Chargers are better in every category, whether it be offense, defense, passing the ball, running the ball, stopping the run, stopping the pass, or special teams. So I feel pretty confident that the Chargers will not be scared to go into Houston, Texas. And I have no problem thinking that Jim Harbaugh will have these guys ready to play. That's on paper. We've seen different things happen. Last year, the Browns were the hottest team in football. They come into Houston and they lose 45-17. So this is not as good of a Houston Texans team as they were last year. Obviously, Tank Dell is hurt this year, and we don't have Stephon Diggs, who was playing well in the beginning of the season. But I wouldn't write off Houston. There's a lot of veteran guys on that team, and now they're 1 year wiser, 1 year more developed, and they went through this playoff run last year, and they went to the divisional round.
Am I a complete cowboy homer if I ask for your level of intrigue in Ezekiel Elliott, Los Angeles Charger, or is that just like an afterthought?
It's weird, right? Like, it's weird because here's Ezekiel Elliott signed to the practice squad, if I'm not mistaken. And then it's
Correct.
like they're going to elevate him. It's intriguing, but the Chargers have Dobbins and Edwards, and I would like to think that he's not the go-to guy, and we're not going to see Ezekiel Elliott have 30 carries. But guess what? If he does, it's another piece of content. I'm here for it.
My prediction is like 3 carries for less than a yard per carry, but one of those is going to be a touchdown.
I like
That is
that.
my-
I like that, Dave. We'll go with it. Fun.
That's my prediction. All right, the divisional rematch on Saturday night. It's on Amazon Prime. Steelers won the first Pittsburgh-Baltimore game 18-16. Ravens took it 34-17 a few weeks later. Along the same lines, talked about like a foregone conclusion. The vibes with the Steelers are rancid. They're on a 4-game losing streak. They're only the third team in history to go into the playoffs on a 4-game losing streak. But I do think it's worth remembering Russell Wilson had the Steelers on the precipice of taking the lead in that second game.
He did.
He fumbles. The game was still close late when he throws a pick six. Obviously, you don't discount that, but I think people are letting the way that one got away from Russ sort of color their perception of this. I still think this is going to be a yucky, close football game.
It was a huge swing. If you remember, Washington, the young player, the safety number 29, jars the ball loose. The Ravens recover. And then the very next time that they have that situation, Bobby Humphrey gets a pick six, and that's the game. Marlon Humphrey. Sorry, his dad was Bobby Humphrey. Marlon Humphrey runs it in with a pick six, and that was the game. I had a good thought on this one because here are the Steelers and the Ravens, and which team would a loss be more crushing to? The Ravens, obviously, because of all this hype about this being the year, this year being different. Lamar, it's just finally when he's going to go on that quest and he's going to topple Josh Allen and he's going to topple Mahomes and he's going to show that he was a true MVP. A loss there would be crushing. Look at the Pittsburgh situation. 4 losses in a row. They haven't won a playoff game since 2016. They're 0-8 in their last 8 playoff games. I did the math today. I went through it. The last time they won a playoff game was in Kansas City in the divisional round on a Sunday night. It was the game. There's the same day as Aaron Rodgers hit Jared Cook along the sideline in Dak's rookie year in the playoffs.
Don't do that. Don't bring that.
Mason Crosby comes in and beats him. That's how long ago it was. So it was before Mahomes even left Texas Tech. That's the last time the Steelers have won a playoff game. So
wow.
Here, if you want to clip something off, I think this will be fine. There is no greater delta. There's no greater delta, no greater difference in impressions on a coach than Steelers fans in local Pittsburgh media on Mike Tomlin, and then us in the national media, me, Mr. New York City, NFL Network, Fox Sports, doing it from a big picture and saying, good God, like I watch the Jaguars, I watch the Jets, I watch the Browns, I watch the Raiders. They would love to go to the playoffs every year and never finish under 500. You guys are spoiled. Steelers fans have a different standard. Steelers fans have a different level of expectation. And if it's one and done again for Mike Tomlin in the wild card round, I think there's going to be a lot of people and Steelers fans and Steelers media that are very upset with how this season went.
And they should be, considering, I mean, they were 10-3, and you got idiots like me saying that it looks like they have a higher ceiling than what we've been used to. I said on this show several times that the early November Steelers looked like a team that could do more than lose their first playoff game. So if we go from there to losing their first playoff game in the span of 6 weeks, you have every right to be pissed off. But here's my question, Peter. This is the Steelers. Mike Tomlin's resume speaks for itself. I'm not even going to entertain the idea of firing Mike Tomlin. I think that's silly. But this is the Steelers. This is the Super Bowl's 3 head coaches ever, the most stable organization in the league, at least one of them. So what do you do? Let's just entertain the idea. Maybe Baltimore does just smack them. Maybe this is a runaway and the Steelers are low and as embarrassed as they've ever been, but you're not in the draft positioning to get a quarterback. They tried that with Kenny Pickett. It did not work. And you're also not the team that is going to go out and do something crazy to get a quarterback the way
who are you even getting?
Yeah, that's another great question. I mean, I guess you could throw your hat in the Sam Darnold sweepstakes. I base this on nothing, and it doesn't matter now, but I bet the Steelers were really aggravated to see Dak Prescott re-sign in Dallas. Like, that was the one thing that I could think about. But you're right. Like, the landscape doesn't look great. So I'm not sure what type of bold swing you could even take. Like, I don't know what the path for the Steelers is out of purgatory if this doesn't get them anywhere.
No, and they took a big swing. I think the fact they went and got 2 quarterbacks was way out of character. They cut bait with a quarterback they drafted 2 years ago in the first round and said, no, we're not good enough. Like, that was not Steelers like. And they said, let's go and get 2 of them. Let's get Fields and Russell. And We praised that decision to bench Fields and put in Russell, and it was working. Russell Wilson, less than 2 months ago, threw for 500 yards against or they put up 500 yards of offense against the Bengals. Like that offense was alive. It had something. Now you turn on the Steelers. George Pickens is moping on the sideline. Freiermuth is dropping balls. Russell's not understanding clock management. It's like they've gone back in time to an era that none of these guys have played football before. That's not how they play. So a loss puts them in a really tough spot in that it's now 9 straight playoff losses. And yet I don't see a drastic way out. You're not firing Tomlin. You're not going to trade Tomlin. I think there would be 7 teams that would line up to hire Tomlin tomorrow if you were saying we're done with Tomlin. It ain't going to happen. That's not what they do. And then offensive coordinator Arthur Smith is a pretty respected guy. He might get a head coaching job. Like you're not going to fire him and blame him. And then these quarterbacks, you got Young, you got Old, you got Russell, you got Justin Fields. I don't think they're going to suddenly upgrade from that. So you're kind of in the same position next year. And yet, if they win and they go on some kind of run, we're like, they're geniuses. I just don't see it. I think Baltimore's going to win this game.
Maybe the answer is from now until you find one, you just draft a quarterback like every freaking year. Even if it's like even if it's late, even if it's day 3, you just got to keep throwing lottery tickets at the situation until you get out of this. I don't have a better answer. My hot take on Baltimore is I really think, and look, there are a lot of teams with a lot of pressure. Kansas City's chasing real deal history, like
Buffalo.
iconic. Buffalo, the Eagles. I mean, we know the Eagles are only ever one bad play away from a meltdown. I still think Lamar and the Ravens might be under the most pressure in
I'm
the
with
NFL.
you.
I really, if they don't make a real run, and God forbid they do lose as a favorite at home to a divisional rival that they just beat the crap out of, I really think even knowing that Josh Allen is in a similar situation, I think Josh has played better in the playoffs over the course of his career. I think it's catastrophic if the Ravens don't bare minimum get back to the AFC title game.
I'm with you. I think that becomes his legacy in a way of him being a great regular season quarterback, which is the biggest slap in the face to a quarterback who looks destined for the Hall of Fame. You don't say that about Russell Wilson. You don't say that about Aaron Rodgers. You don't say great regular season quarterback, bad postseason for him. Now, Rodgers has come up short several times, but he's got something that Lamar can't sniff, and that's a Super Bowl ring, and that's forever. And Russ has lost some bad playoff games. He's got a Super Bowl ring. That's forever. Cam Newton went to the Super Bowl. You go down the list. Every great quarterback who has won an MVP has had that sniff. Matt Ryan went to the Super Bowl. Lamar, they haven't gotten there. And last year to fall to the Chiefs at home after being that 1 seed, it was soul crushing. They had it. They were a game away. And for whatever reason, the game plan got away from them. To lose in the wild card round to a bad Steelers team at home on a Saturday night, it would be very disappointing.
Let's wrap this up with what I'm going to call the Peter Schrager victory lap game, because the Denver Broncos are a playoff team. They are traveling to Buffalo. Now, my question for you, you picked Sean Payton's Denver Broncos as a playoff team.
Yeah.
Do you have the moxie to take it the next step? It's a huge spread. It's like 9 points, which seems large.
You know what I've done, which is the ultimate sports media, hedge or slash, cowardly move. I've done this move on Good Morning Football. Don't be shocked if the Broncos pull this one off. Don't be shocked. But at no point am I saying the Broncos are going to pull this off. So don't be surprised. Don't shocked is where I'm at right now. He's got them believing. They don't think this is an insurmountable thing. I've spoken to Sean this week. Like they feel pretty confident that they match up and that this team is just young and fun enough that they could be one of those miracle teams. And they've done it all season. Why not do it one more time? And the pressure is going to be on Buffalo, not them. They've got house money here. But I'm going to go with don't be shocked if they pull the upset, but I am by no means coming out here and predicting a Broncos upset.
There's so many things I like about this matchup. And like it would have been fun for Cincinnati to sneak in because the quarterbacks are what drive the ratings. Don't get me wrong, but like best pass rush in the league against the best quarterback at not getting sacked since the '09 Colts.
No doubt.
Josh Allen was on pace to be sacked like 25 times this year, and then somewhere around mid-season, he just stopped. He's only been sacked 1 time in the last 7 games, which is remarkable for a guy that never gives up on a play the way that Josh
No,
Allen
and a
does.
lot of it is the offensive line, but some of it is him just being miraculous behind the line of scrimmage and avoiding sacks. He's been so good at it. I I ask you as we look at this, there's two number two seeds, Bills and the Eagles. They both are big favorites here. A loss for which favored team would be more devastating, Philadelphia or Buffalo?
Ooh. Oh man, that's good. I think I have to say Josh because again, it's the Peyton Manning thing. And notice I said Josh, not Buffalo,
Yeah,
honestly.
I get it.
It's the Peyton Manning thing where like with each playoff failure, that monkey on your back becomes even bigger. But man, I mean, but here's the difference though. I think it's a bigger deal for Josh Allen and the way that he will be talked about in the wake of this game. But if Philly loses the opener, all hell could break loose. I mean,
No
that is
doubt.
a like nobody's getting fired if the Bills lose to the Broncos. At least I don't think so.
I don't
Like
think so.
maybe Joe Brady takes a head coaching job, but like I
Yeah,
don't see anybody getting fired. I think anything's on the table if the Eagles embarrass themselves on Sunday.
I
Like
think
if they
I
really
think
play poorly.
you go back 2 weeks in the decision to not let Saquon get that record. If you lose in the wild card round and that was the season and that's why you were saving him and you still lose, that is one that will be analyzed. And it wasn't so bad at the moment, but when you saw the Buccaneers celebrating Mike Evans getting that 1,000-yard season and the way that team was so happy for him and the locker room was so jubilant, like I don't know, maybe it wouldn't have been the worst thing to let Saquon break that record and have that moment for Philly going into the playoffs. They made a different decision. If you lose in the wild card round and you didn't get the record, yikes.
This is a uniquely this feels like a really uniquely good playoff feel because okay, the Commanders, everything that happens from here is fine. Like I don't think there's a ton of pressure for Washington. The Chargers, obviously, they're a year ahead of schedule. And I would throw in the Broncos as well. We talked about this earlier this week on the show. Everybody else, it's going to be a big problem if you don't at least get to the divisional round of the
No
postseason.
doubt.
And that's obviously not everybody can make it. I'm curious about this. I think I'm going to follow your lead. I'm going to chicken out and say, don't be shocked. But man, I look at this Broncos pass rush, and then this is a uniquely good matchup in the sense of yes, the Bills have a lot of great weapons, but no truly elite weapon. Patrick Surtain can take away the best thing that the
Whatever they
Bills,
have.
whatever they want to do, he can take it away. And if you've got a bunch of other guys that can key on the other options, I don't know. I'll say this. I don't see the Bills covering 9. I think I would pick them to win, but 9 is a huge spread for a defense this
Big.
talented.
And the Broncos were the worst team, went into Buffalo on a Monday night and beat them last year. They've done it.
I hope I hope that this game is as entertaining as that absolute mess. That was memorable. Hopefully this one equally so. Either way, Peter, looking forward to a full weekend of playoff football, man. I appreciate your help. I'll talk to you soon.
Guys, have an awesome week. Thanks, Dave.
One last thing to get to. That's our Super Six presented by DraftKings. The regular season is over, but the Super Six continues on. If you're not familiar with the Super Six, now is the perfect time. Head on over to foxsports.com or the Fox Sports app. The Super Six, you make 6 picks. Could be point spreads, could be yardage totals, could be you name it. 6 different picks. You make them. And if you hit all 6 of them, you can win big during wild card weekend. Give yourself a little extra juice. Give yourself a little something extra to root for as you watch these wild card games. Makes it that much more fun to follow along with. And I, as always, will do my best to help you out. I cannot vouch for how accurate these will wind up being, but I feel good about them as we head into the weekend. For starters, the prop is which quarterback will finish with the most passing yards. Baker Mayfield against Washington, Sam Darnold against the Rams, Matthew Stafford against the Vikings, or Jordan Love against the Eagles. And I'm going to roll with Matthew Stafford right here in LA going against the Minnesota Vikings. Yes, Minnesota's defense is nasty. We talked about it with Greg Olsen, but they are very good against the run. I don't know how much push Kyron Williams is going to get against that Minnesota run defense. Matthew Stafford likes to air the ball out, and if the Vikings blitz him, the throws will be there for him. I trust him more than I trusted what I saw from Sam Darnold last week. I think the Rams will have to throw to move the ball in this game. I think Matthew Stafford's really good at doing it. So I'm going to roll with Stafford in that one. The next one is who will have the most receiving yards? Will it be Justin Jefferson going against the Rams? Puka Nacua. Maybe Matthew Stafford throws him a lot of balls. I could see that going against the Vikings. Nico Collins against the LA Chargers. Or will it be A.J. Brown going against the Green Bay Packers? And this might defy conventional wisdom. We said maybe this Green Bay Philly game turns into a ground and pound, run dominated sort of deal. But I just have a feeling about A.J. Brown. I think the Packers' run defense has been really good over the last back half of the season. And I think they're going to have to load up to stop Saquon Barkley. I think that's got to be line one for stopping Philadelphia is dealing with Saquon. I wonder if A.J. Brown is going to have some favorable matchups in this game. And I wonder if Jalen Hurts looks his way, which I think he will, if he's going to pull down an explosive catch or two. I don't know that A.J. Brown is going to catch a ton of passes in this game, but I bet 2 or 3 of them are for big explosive chunk gains. I like A.J. Brown to finish with the most receiving yards this week, which is maybe counterintuitive for a game with such good running backs, but stranger things have happened. That does it for the Super Six. That also does it for our Wild Card Weekend preview. I hope y'all have so much fun watching these games. The regular season is great, but this is why we're all here. One and done. No series, just one game to decide who moves on. The thrill of victory, the agony of defeat. There's nothing better than high stakes football, and we've got plenty of it this weekend. And as usual, we will be back on the other side of the weekend to break it all down. We will be right here in your feed on Monday with the recap. We also, we have a playoff show as well. We will be in your feed on Sunday reacting to everything that happened Saturday. So we will have instant reaction from Chargers Texans as well as Ravens Steelers. Can get that before you start things off on Sunday. And then obviously we've got the full Sunday of games. We got you covered is what I'm trying to say. Just make sure you're subscribed. Go find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you prefer to get your pods. You can find us on YouTube. We'll be there all weekend long. We got you covered throughout the playoffs. I am so looking forward to it. I appreciate y'all for listening, and we'll talk to you real soon.